The carriage that carried Marigold Whitcomb back to Ravenshollow had no crest on its door, no liveried footman, and no mistress's monogram stitched into its cushions. It was a hired post-chaise from the inn at Alnwick, drawn by two tired greys, and the woman inside it wore a traveling cloak of plain charcoal wool with a single brooch at her throat that nobody in the village would have recognized as worth more than the carriage itself. She had not seen the gates of Ravenshollow in 9 years. The driver slowed at the lodge house, peered down at the gatekeeper, and said the name his passenger had given him at the inn. The gatekeeper, an old man with a weathered face Marigold did remember, leaned forward to look through the window. His mouth opened. It closed. He did not speak. He simply turned and pulled the gates wide, and watched the carriage roll past with the expression of a man witnessing something he had been told would never happen. Inside the carriage, Marigold pressed her gloved hands flat against her knees and counted her breaths. She had practiced this for months. She had rehearsed every sentence. She had imagined every face. But she had not imagined the gatekeeper's silence, and now her practiced composure trembled at the edges like a curtain in a draught. 9 years ago, she had been carried through these gates in a different kind of carriage, one with a ducal crest and a liveried escort, and a maid who had wept in the corner because the staff already knew what the bride did not. 9 years ago, she had been 21, newly married, frightened and proud, and certain that love would be enough. 3 months after that arrival, she had borne a son. 3 weeks after that birth, the Duke of Ravenshollow had stood at the foot of her recovery bed and told her, in a voice without weather, that arrangements had been made for her removal to her aunt's house in Cornwall. He had not raised his voice. He had not reached for her hand. He had said only that the matter was settled, that the boy would be raised at Ravenshollow under his care, and that she was to depart within the week. She had asked him why. He had said, "Because I no longer require you here." She had been 21. She had not known the words a woman uses when a husband sends her away. She had known only that her milk was still coming in, that her body had nearly given way, producing the heir he now apparently no longer required her for, and that the man at the foot of her bed was the same man who 4 months earlier had told her in a candlelit corridor that she was the only living creature he had ever wanted to keep. She had not wept in front of him. That, at least, she had managed. She had wept later, in the carriage, where no one of consequence could see. For 9 years, she had not returned. For 9 years, she had not asked permission. She had written 1 letter, in the first month, asking only whether the child was thriving. A reply had come in his hand, 3 lines long. The boy is well. He has been named Thaddeus Corwin Whitcomb. You need not write again. She had not written again. The carriage rounded the long curve of the drive, and the house came into view between the elms, and Marigold did something she had not allowed herself to do in 9 years. She let herself look at it. Ravenshollow was beautiful. That was the first cruelty. A long honey-stoned facade with deep mullioned windows, ivy climbing the western wing, the lake just visible behind it, dark and still under an overcast sky. She had loved this house once. She had walked these gardens as a bride and believed every stone of it would be her home until she died. The carriage stopped at the front steps. A footman opened the door. He did not know her. He was too young. He bowed to a stranger, handed her down, and asked whether she was expected. "No," Marigold said. "I am not expected. Tell the housekeeper that Mrs. Tarleton has come on a matter of business with His Grace, and that the matter is private, and that I will wait in the morning room until he is at liberty." The name was not a lie, exactly. It was the name she had used for 9 years. It was the name on the deed of the small house in Lyme Regis, where she had built, brick by brick, a life he knew nothing about. It was the name under which she had been received in drawing rooms from Bristol to Edinburgh, and it was the name printed on the small linen-bound books that had, in the last 3 years, made her quietly and entirely independent of any man living. She had not come to beg. She had come because of the letter. It had arrived at her house in Lyme Regis 11 days ago, written in a hand she did not recognize. On paper, she did. The seal had been the matriarch's. The letter had been 4 sentences long. The boy has been ill. He is recovering. He has begun to ask questions. Come. That was all. No signature, but none was needed. Only one woman alive would have written those 4 sentences, and only one woman alive would have known where to send them. The footman led her into the morning room. The morning room had been redecorated. The walls were a colder green than she remembered. The chair she had once read in by the window had been replaced. She sat in the new chair, folded her hands, and waited. She heard him before she saw him. His step on the marble was unchanged. He had always walked like a man who knew exactly how long it would take him to cross a room and resented every inch. The door opened. She did not stand. She had decided 3 nights ago in a coaching inn outside Bath that she would not stand for him. Not the first time. "Mrs. Tarleton," said the Duke of Ravenshollow, "I am told you have come on a matter of business." He stopped. He had been looking at his cuff as he entered, adjusting something there with the half-attention of a man who expected to deal briskly with a tradeswoman. He looked up. Marigold watched his face. She had imagined this moment for 9 years. She had imagined fury, indifference, contempt, even tenderness. She had imagined every variation. What she had not imagined was this, that he would look at her the way a man looks at a ghost he does not yet realize is a ghost. That his hand would stop on his cuff, that his mouth would form a word and not finish it, that he would take exactly 1 step into the room and stop, and stand there as though the floor had betrayed him. He had grown older. She had not expected that, although she should have. There was gray now at his temples, and a hardness in the set of his jaw that had not been there at 28. He was 37. She knew that the way she knew the date of her own son's birth. He said, "Marigold." Just the name. Not a question. Not a greeting. Only the word, as though the saying of it required all the air in his chest. She inclined her head. "Your Grace." He did not move. She watched him try to gather himself and fail. She watched him try a second time. The second attempt held. "I was told," he said, very carefully, "that a Mrs. Tarleton had come. That is the name I use. Why?" It was not asked as a question. It was asked as though he already knew the answer and could not bear it. "Because I am no longer Marigold Whitcomb," she said. "I have not been Marigold Whitcomb for 9 years. You sent her away. Mrs. Tarleton is what I made instead." His hand was still on his cuff. He let it fall. "Your letter," she said, before he could speak again, "reached me at Lyme Regis. The seal was your grandmother's. The hand was hers. It said the boy had been ill." "My grandmother," he said slowly, "did not write to you. Then someone else used her seal. My grandmother is dead, Marigold. She has been dead 17 months. The room went very quiet. Marigold did not move. She had trained herself, over 9 years, not to show what a blow had cost her, and the training held now, but only barely. The Dowager had been the one ally she had counted on. The Dowager had been the one person at Ravenshollow who had embraced her on her wedding day, and called her granddaughter, and meant it. And the letter that had carried her here, the letter she had carried in her reticule all the way from Lyme Regis, the letter she had read so many times the paper had begun to soften at the folds, had not been from her at all. She reached into her reticule. She drew the letter out. She held it across the small distance between them. He took it. He read it. She watched his face change a second time, and this change was worse than the first, because it was not shock. It was recognition. "This is not her hand," he said. "But I know this hand." He did not say whose. He folded the letter once. He folded it again. He did not give it back. "Marigold," he said, and his voice had gone very low and very controlled, the way it had gone the morning he had stood at the foot of her bed, 9 years ago. "You should not have come." The letter said the boy had been ill. "The boy is well. The boy has been well. Whoever wrote this lied to you to bring you here, and I don't yet know what they want. I tell you now. Where is he? Marigold. Where is my son?" The Duke of Ravenshollow looked at the woman he had sent away 9 years ago, looked at the brooch at her throat, the cut of her cloak, the steadiness of her hands, looked at her face, which was no longer the face of the girl he had married. He opened his mouth to answer her. The morning room door opened first. A boy stood in the doorway, 8 years old, perhaps 9, dark hair, gray eyes, a book under one arm and a question half formed on his mouth that died the moment he saw the strange woman sitting in his mother's old chair. He looked at the Duke. He looked at Marigold. He looked at the Duke again. "Father," he said. "Who is that?" The Duke did not answer immediately. He was looking at Marigold, and Marigold was looking at the boy, and neither of them seemed to remember that the boy was waiting. Thaddeus Corwin Whitcomb stood in the doorway with the unconscious dignity of a child who had been raised by men. He held the book under his arm the way his father held a riding crop. He waited for an answer, the way his father waited for the post, as though the world owed him courtesy and would, in time, deliver it. He had her mouth. That was the thing Marigold had not been ready for. She had imagined his face in 1,000 variations across 9 years, and not once had she imagined that he would have her mouth. She had thought he would be entirely his father, because that was what she had been told, in pieces and in silences, for 9 years. The boy is the Duke's. The boy is at Ravenshollow. The boy is being raised as a Whitcomb, and you are not part of that. She had imagined a small, severe child with gray eyes and nothing of her in him at all. He had her mouth, and he was waiting for an answer, and Marigold could not produce one. The Duke produced it. "Thaddeus," he said, "this is Mrs. Tarleton. She has come on a matter of business. Go and find Mr. Halford. Tell him I wish to speak with him after dinner." The boy looked at Marigold a moment longer. He did not bow. He was not impolite. He was simply held, in the way children are held by things they cannot name. Then he gave his father the small nod of a younger man, dismissed by an elder, and turned, and walked out, and shut the door behind him with the precision of someone who had been taught not to slam. Marigold did not breathe until the latch clicked. "He is taller than I imagined," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "And he carries himself well." The Duke did not answer. He had not moved from the place he had been standing when the boy entered. He still held the forged letter. His eyes were on the closed door. "How old is he, Cassian?" It was the first time she had used his name. She had not meant to. The name came out of 9 years of locked rooms and unspoken sentences, and once it was in the air, it could not be put back. He looked at her. Something in his face moved. "He turned 9 in March," he said. "In March. On the 17th. I know the date." "Yes," he said. "I imagine you do." The silence that followed was not a hostile one. It was the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of a thing they had not yet decided to enter. Marigold drew a breath and took the first step. "I came because I believed your grandmother had summoned me." She had not. Someone forged her hand. You recognize that hand. You have not told me whose it is. Before we go any further, Cassian, you will tell me whose hand it was." "I will tell you," he said. "But not now. Now. Marigold, you sent me away 9 years ago without an explanation. You are not entitled to a second silence." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched his jaw work the way it had used to work when he had been 28 and unable to say the thing he most needed to say. The Duke of Ravenshollow had always been a man who paid for his words before he spent them. She had once loved that about him. She had once thought it meant his words, when they came, would always be true. "You are right," he said. "But I will tell you when we are not standing in a room the boy may walk back into. I will tell you tonight, after he has been put to bed, in the library. Will that suffice?" It was not a refusal. It was a delay with terms. She accepted it, because to refuse would be to begin the war before she had laid out her conditions. "It will suffice," she said. "On 3 conditions." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was something older. "Conditions. 3. The first, I will not be lodged in the dower house. I will not be hidden. If I am to remain at Ravenshollow even one night, I will be lodged in a guest suite of the main house, and the staff will be informed that I am here as your wife, because that, your grace, is what I legally remain." He did not flinch. "Granted. The second, you will not introduce me to that child as Mrs. Tarleton again. You will not introduce me to him at all until you and I have agreed, together, on what he is to be told. He is 9 years old. He has a right not to be lied to twice." The Duke closed his eyes for the briefest moment. When he opened them, something in him had gone very still. "Granted. The third." She paused. This was the one she had rehearsed least, because it was the one she had not been certain she would have the courage to say. She said it now, because she had come this far, and because the boy had her mouth, and because, if she did not say it now, she would never say it. "The third is that for as long as I remain in this house, you will not lie to me again. Not by silence, not by half-answers, not by sending me to wait in another room while you decide what is convenient for me to know. Whatever you tell me tonight in the library, you will tell me in full. I will not interrupt. I will not weep. I will hear it. But I will hear it whole, Cassian, or I will be in a carriage by morning, and you will not see me again in this life." He did not answer at once. He walked slowly to the window. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the long sweep of lawn down to the lake, and Marigold watched the line of his shoulders and remembered, with a sharpness that surprised her, what it had felt like to stand behind him in the first weeks of their marriage, before the child, before the ruin, and put her hand between those shoulder blades and feel him go quiet under her palm. "Granted," he said to the window. "All 3? "All 3, Marigold, on my honor, such as it is." She rose at last. Her legs held. She had been afraid they would not. "Then ring for the housekeeper," she said, "and have her show me to a room. I have traveled 4 days. I would like to wash before I see my son again." He turned from the window. He looked at her across the morning room, across the 9 years, across the small, bright distance that, against every probability, still existed between them. "There is something you should know first," he said, "before I send for her." "What?" "The hand on that letter, the one neither of us has named yet." "What of it?" "It was Thaddeus's." She did not faint. She had not fainted in 9 years, and she did not begin now. But she sat back down, because her legs unmade the decision her pride had just made, and she sat in the new chair by the window and looked at her husband across the cold green room. "He is 9 years old," she said. "Yes." "He cannot have known where to send a letter to me." "He could not have done it alone." "Then who?" "That," said the Duke, "is what I intend to discover before this day is out. But the hand is his, Marigold. I have seen it on every copybook in the schoolroom for 4 years. I would know it among 10,000. She put one hand to her throat. The brooch was there. She had pinned it that morning in the inn at Alnwick, the way she pinned it every morning, and the small, cold weight of it under her finger steadied her now, the way it had steadied her on every difficult day of the last 9 years. "He wrote to me," she said. "He found out I existed, and he wrote to me. And he used your grandmother's seal, because he is a clever child, and he knew I would not come for any other name. Yes, Cassian. Yes. What have you told him about me?" The Duke did not answer at once. When he did, his voice had gone to the place it went when the truth cost him something to speak. "I told him that his mother had been a kind woman who had loved him, and that she had been sent away from Raven's Hollow when he was very small, for reasons he would understand when he was older. I told him she lived. I told him she was well. I told him she did not write because I had asked her not to, and that the asking had been mine and not hers." Marigold closed her eyes. She had not expected that. She had expected, for 9 years, that he had told the boy she was dead, or that he had told the boy nothing, or that he had told the boy she had abandoned them. She had built, in the small house in Lyme Regis, an entire architecture of grief around the certainty that her son believed one of those 3 things. She had not expected the truth. The truth was almost worse, because the truth meant that for 9 years, somewhere in this house, a small boy had been growing up knowing he had a mother who lived, who was well, who did not write because his father had asked her not to. A small boy who, the moment he was old enough to question the asking, had picked up a pen and gone around it. "He has her seal," Marigold said. Her voice was not quite steady. "Your grandmother's." "How?" "She gave it to him before she died. She gave him a great many things. She was very fond of him." "Did she write to me, ever, in those 9 years?" "No." "Did she ask to?" He hesitated. "Yes. I asked her not to." "Why?" "Because I had asked you not to write, and it would have been a coward's move to allow her to write what I had forbidden you to." She opened her eyes. She looked at him. "That," she said, "is the first decent thing you have said to me in 9 years." He took the blow without flinching. He had earned it. He stood at the window and let her look at him, and she looked at him the way a woman looks at a country she has been exiled from, with grief and with the bitter clarity that comes after grief has done its first work. "Ring the bell, Cassian." He rang the bell. A housekeeper Marigold did not know came in a moment later, a square, capable woman in black, perhaps 50, with kind eyes and the unreadable face of someone who had served a ducal house long enough to be surprised by nothing. The Duke did not introduce them. He simply said, "Mrs. Pell, this is Her Grace, the Duchess of Raven's Hollow. She has come home. Prepare the south suite for her and inform the staff." Mrs. Pell did not blink. She curtsied deeply to Marigold. She said, "Welcome home, Your Grace," in a voice that suggested she had been waiting 9 years to say exactly those words. Then she withdrew to do as she had been told. When the door closed, Marigold said, without looking at him, "I will see the boy at dinner. You will tell him before then who I am. You will not soften it. He is the one who summoned me. He has earned the truth before I have. Yes. And tonight in the library, Cassian, you will tell me why." "Yes." She rose. This time her legs held all the way. She crossed the room, and she passed him, and at the door she stopped, with her back to him, and said the thing she had not been certain she would say either. "I built a life, Cassian, in the years you did not write. I built a life that does not require this house, or this name, or you. Whatever you tell me tonight, understand that I am not the girl you sent away. That girl died in a carriage between Northumberland and Cornwall 9 years ago. The woman you will speak to tonight is someone you have never met." "I know," he said quietly behind her. "I have been watching her for the last hour, and I don't know her at all." She did not turn. She walked out of the morning room and across the marble of the great hall and up the staircase she had last climbed as a bride. And somewhere on the second landing, where no one could see her, she put her hand against the wall and let herself shake, just once, for 9 seconds, before she straightened, smoothed her cloak, and walked the rest of the way to the south suite as the woman she had become. Below, in the morning room, the Duke of Ravenshollow stood at the window for a long time, holding a forged letter in his son's careful 9-year-old hand, and thought about the conversation he was going to have that night in the library with the wife he had spent 9 years protecting from a truth she was now going to make him speak aloud. The south suite faced the lake. That was the first cruelty Marigold registered as Mrs. Pell opened the doors and stood aside to let her enter. She had asked, on her wedding tour, that this suite be hers when they returned to Ravenshollow. She had stood at the window with Cassian behind her, his hands resting at her waist, and said she wanted to wake every morning to water. He had laughed, the rare unguarded laugh of his early married months, and said the suite was hers as long as she wanted it. 3 months later, he had moved her, while she was still recovering from the birth, into a smaller chamber at the back of the house. She had not understood why at the time. She understood now. He had not been able to bear the thought of her in that suite, in that bed, after what the physician had said. She had not stood in this room in 9 years. It had not been touched. The walls were still the pale rose silk she had chosen. The bed was still hung in cream and gold. The small writing desk by the window still held the inkstand she had been given as a wedding gift, its silver dulled with disuse. A vase of fresh hothouse roses had been set on the mantel recently. Someone in this house had been keeping the roses ready. His Grace ordered the room kept aired and dusted, Your Grace, Mrs. Pell said quietly. Every week. For 9 years. Marigold did not turn from the window. She did not trust her face yet. Thank you, Mrs. Pell. I will ring when I am ready to dress for dinner. Yes, Your Grace. The door closed. Marigold stood at the window until she was certain of her face, and then she turned and looked at the room, and the room looked back at her like a faithful old dog who had waited at a door for 9 years and did not yet understand that the waiting was not over. She unpinned the brooch at her throat and laid it on the dressing table. Then she sat in the small chair by the window, and she allowed herself, for the first time since she had entered the gates that morning, to think. The boy had written the letter. The boy had used the seal. The boy had wanted her here, and had been clever enough to engineer her presence around the man who had spent 9 years arranging her absence. That fact reorganized everything she had believed for 9 years about her own family. The second fact was harder. The Duke had not lied to the boy. He had told him, in measured language, the version of the truth that did the least damage. She had spent 9 years believing that the man who had sent her away had also poisoned her son against her, and that belief had been wrong, and the wrongness of it sat in her chest, now like a stone she did not yet know how to put down. The third fact was the suite, the roses on the mantel, the dust that was not on the desk. A knock came at the door, soft, hesitant. Not Mrs. Pell. Come. The door opened, and a woman entered whom Marigold did not at first recognize. Tall, fair, perhaps 30, in a dove-gray gown with a small lace collar. She stood in the doorway with her hands clasped before her, and she looked at Marigold with an expression that was neither welcome nor hostility, but something more difficult than either. The careful, contained attention of a woman who had been preparing for this meeting for some time and was determined to do it correctly. Forgive me, Your Grace, she said. I am Honora Sedgwick. I am Thaddeus's governess. I asked Mrs. Pell whether I might be permitted to speak with you before dinner. She said you were not to be disturbed. I came anyway. I beg your pardon for the impertinence. Marigold rose slowly. "Sit down, Miss Sedgwick. Please." The governess sat in the second chair by the window, with the upright posture of a woman accustomed to long hours of needlework and short hours of sleep. Her eyes, Marigold noticed, were gray. The same gray as the boy's, the same gray as Cassian's. "You are the one," Marigold said quietly, "who helped him write the letter." Honora Sedgwick did not deny it. She did not lower her eyes. She said, "I am the one who allowed him to send it, Your Grace. I did not help him compose it. I gave him the seal, which Her Grace the Dowager left to him in a small mahogany box upon her death. I gave him the address, which I had obtained from His Grace's correspondence 2 years ago, when I first determined that I might one day need it. The letter the boy wrote is the letter the boy wrote. The hand is his. The decision was his. My part was only to make the decision possible." Marigold sat very still. "Why?" "Because he asked me, when he was 7 years old, why his mother did not love him. And I told him the truth, Your Grace. I told him that I did not believe that was the shape of it. I told him I had served in this house for 4 years, and in those 4 years, I had watched a man who never spoke of his wife order her rooms aired every week, and keep her portrait in his private study, and stop, sometimes, in the corridor outside her old chamber, as though he had forgotten where he was going. I told him I did not know why she had been sent away, but I did not believe it had been for want of love. I told him that when he was old enough to bear the truth, he should ask for it. And I told him that if his father would not give it to him, he should send for his mother and ask her himself." The fire ticked in the grate. Outside the window, the lake had gone the color of pewter under the late afternoon sky. "He was 8 when he began to plan it," Honora Sedgwick said. "He is 9 now. He waited a year, Your Grace. He waited a year because he wanted to be sure he would not lose his courage when you came." Marigold put one hand over her eyes. "You could have lost your position for this, Miss Sedgwick." "I could have. I have prepared a letter of resignation in the event His Grace dismisses me when he learns. I do not regret it, Your Grace. I would do it again. The boy was suffering. A child cannot be raised by a father who refuses to name the wound. His Grace did not refuse to name it. He told the boy his mother lived and was well, and did not write, because he had asked her not to. Yes, Your Grace, he did. But a child does not hear those words the way a grown woman does. A child hears, 'My mother could write and does not.' He has spent 4 years of his short life believing that you chose your silence. The letter he sent you was not an accusation. It was a test." "A test?" "Yes, Your Grace. He wanted to know whether you would come." Marigold lowered her hand. She looked at the governess across the small distance between the 2 chairs by the window. "You will not be dismissed, Miss Sedgwick," she said. "Not while I am in this house. You have my word. Your Grace, I cannot accept that. You can, and you will. Whatever else happens between His Grace and myself in this house, that boy is not going to lose the one person who has been telling him the truth. Burn your letter of resignation. We will not speak of it again." Honora Sedgwick rose. She curtsied, low, and when she straightened, Marigold saw that the governess's eyes were very bright, although her face was perfectly composed. "Thank you, Your Grace. One thing more, Miss Sedgwick." "Your Grace?" "At dinner tonight, will he sit at table, or will he take his meal in the schoolroom? He has taken his meal at table since he was 7. His Grace insisted on it. Then I will see him at dinner. Please tell him before he comes down that the woman in the morning room was his mother. Tell him I did not know who he was when he came in, because I had not seen him since he was 3 weeks old, and that the not knowing was not the same as not loving. Tell him I will sit at his father's left hand at dinner, and that he is welcome to look at me, or not look at me, as long as he likes, and I will not require anything of him tonight that he does not feel ready to give." The governess inclined her head and went to do as she had been bid. When the door closed, Marigold sat down again in the chair by the window, and she did not weep, but she pressed both palms to her face and stayed that way for some time. Below in the house, somewhere in the long, quiet afternoon, the Duke of Ravenshollow was telling a 9-year-old boy who his mother was. Dinner at Ravenshollow had not changed. The dining room was still hung in dark green damask. The table still gleamed under 20 candles, and the silver still bore the Whitcomb crest at every place. What had changed was the seating. There were 3 places laid, not 2. The Duke at the head, the boy at his right, and at his left, for the first time in 9 years, a setting for the Duchess. Marigold descended the staircase in a gown of deep midnight blue that she had brought from Lyme Regis. It was not a London gown. It was a gown made for a respectable widow of independent means receiving a publisher in her drawing room, and it was the finest thing Mrs. Tarleton owned. She wore the brooch at her throat. She wore no other jewels. She had not asked Mrs. Pell to dress her hair. She had pinned it herself in the simple coil she had worn for 9 years. Cassian was in the dining room when she entered. He was standing by the fire in evening dress, and he had not yet taken his place. He turned when she came in. He looked at her. He had looked at her in the morning room with the face of a man seeing a ghost. He looked at her now with the face of a man who had been given 5 hours to prepare, and had prepared, and had still not been ready. He bowed. "Your Grace. Your Grace." He did not offer her his arm. She did not expect it. He moved to the table and drew out her chair himself, and as she sat, he said, very low, so the footman by the sideboard would not hear, "I told him. He took it well. He has asked me to allow him to speak first when he comes in, before either of us addresses him. I have agreed. Thank you." He took his own seat. The footman moved forward with the soup. They did not speak. A moment later, the side door opened, and Thaddeus Corwin Whitcomb walked into the dining room. He was wearing a small, dark blue jacket and a clean white shirt, and his hair had been combed flat, and he carried himself as though he had rehearsed every step of the walk from the schoolroom to the table. He stopped at his chair. He did not sit. He looked at his father, who nodded once. Then he looked at Marigold. "Madam," said Thaddeus Whitcomb, in the small, precise voice of a child speaking words he had practiced in front of a mirror, "I am told you are my mother. I am told I sent for you. I am told I have not seen you since I was very small. Before we eat, I should like to say 2 things. May I?" "You may," Marigold said. Her voice did not break. She did not know how. "Say what you wish." "The first," said the boy, "is that I am sorry I tricked you. I did not mean to be cruel. I only thought you would not come for any other reason. If you are angry, I would rather you were angry with me than with Miss Sedgwick or my father. I am not angry with anyone, Thaddeus." Oh, he blinked. He had not expected that. He recovered. "The second is that I do not know what to call you. I do not know if I should call you mother, because I have never called anyone mother, and the word is strange in my mouth. I do not want to call you Mrs. Tarleton, because father says that is not your real name. I would like, if I may, to call you Marigold, until I know what feels right. Is that very rude?" "It is not rude at all," Marigold said. "Marigold is what your grandmother called me when she was alive. I would be honored to be called what she called me, by you." Something in the boy's small face eased. "Thank you," he said. He sat down. He picked up his soup spoon with the careful attention of a child who had been taught manners by men, and he began to eat. Across the table, Marigold met her husband's eyes, and her husband, the Duke of Ravenshollow, who had not wept in 9 years that any living person had witnessed, looked down at his plate and did not look up again for a long time. The rest of the meal passed in small, ordinary things. The boy spoke about his pony, whose name was Hesper. The boy spoke about a book he was reading, which was about the Roman general Belisarius, whom he found admirable but tragic. The boy did not ask Marigold any of the questions she had been bracing herself to answer, because the boy was 9 years old, and he had spent his courage already on the 2 things he had said when he came in, and he was tired now, and he wanted to talk about his pony. When the meal was over, Thaddeus rose and bowed to his father, and bowed with grave attention to Marigold. "Good night, father. Good night, Marigold. Good night, Thaddeus." When he had gone, the Duke set down his glass and looked across the candles at his wife. "The library," he said. "In half an hour." "Yes." She rose, and she went to the library half an hour later, and the door was open, and a fire was lit, and Cassian Whitcomb, the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow, was waiting for her with his back to the fire, and a small object in his hand that he had not held in 9 years. "Before I tell you why I sent you away," he said, "I want to give you something I should have given you 9 years ago." He held it out to her. It was the wedding ring she had left on his pillow the morning the carriage took her to Cornwall. She did not take it. She stood in the doorway of the library with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the small gold circle in his palm, and she did not move, and she did not speak, and Cassian Whitcomb did not lower his hand. "I am not asking you to wear it," he said. "I am asking you to take it back. It was yours. It has been mine to keep for 9 years. It should not have been mine for an hour. Then why did you keep it? Because I could not throw it away, and I could not give it back, and I could not bring myself to leave it in a drawer where a maid might find it. So I carried it, for 9 years, in the inside pocket of every coat I have owned since the morning I sent you away." She crossed the room then, slowly, and she took the ring out of his palm, and she did not put it on, but she closed her hand around it, and the small warmth of it, warmed by his pocket, by his body, by 9 years of being carried, made her draw a breath that was not quite steady. "Sit down, Cassian." He sat. She sat opposite him in the leather chair by the fire, with the ring closed in her left hand and her right hand flat on the arm of the chair, the way a woman sits when she has decided she will not move until the thing has been said. "Now tell me." He did. He told her, in the careful, unbroken voice of a man who had rehearsed the telling for 9 years and had never once spoken it aloud, what the physician had said 3 days after the birth. He told her that Dr. Maitland had stood in his study with his hat in his hands and had used the words internal injury and another confinement, and almost certainly fatal. He told her that he had asked the physician 3 times whether he was certain, and the physician had been certain. He told her that he had sat in the study after the physician had left, and he had thought, for the first time since his father had died, that he did not know how to be the man his title required him to be. He told her that he had thought of his grandmother, who would expect a spare heir within the year. He told her that he had thought of his uncles, who would press for it. He told her that he had thought of the entail, and the cousins who would inherit if Thaddeus died young. He told her that he had thought of every pressure that would come down on her, day after day, as long as she remained Duchess of Ravenshollow in residence. And he told her that he had thought, last, of her. Of the way she had looked when they had carried her down from the bedchamber, pale and shaking, holding the child against her chest, with hands that had no strength left in them. He had thought of that, and he had decided, sitting alone in the study at 2 o'clock in the morning, that he would rather be hated for the rest of his life by a woman who lived than be loved for the rest of his life by a woman who had died trying to give him a second son. "So I sent you away," he said. "I sent you to Cornwall, where you would be out of the line of pressure, and I told no one why, because if anyone had known, it would have got back to you, and you would have come back, Marigold. I knew you would have come back. You were 21, and you loved me. And you would have come back and stood at the foot of my bed and refused to leave. And I would not have had the strength to send you away a second time. So I made you hate me instead. And I did it badly, and I did it cruelly. And I have lived with the doing of it for 9 years. And I am sorry, Marigold. I have been sorry every day. The fire ticked in the grate. She did not move. She did not weep. She sat with the ring closed in her left hand, and she looked at him, and she waited until she was certain her voice would do what she needed it to do. Cassian, she said, look at me. He looked at her. You decided, she said quietly, that my life was a thing you had the right to arrange without consulting me. You decided that my body, which had nearly died producing your son, belonged to your decision and not to mine. You decided that my grief, for 9 years, was a price worth paying to keep me alive. You did not ask me, Cassian. You did not give me the choice. You took the choice from me because you decided on your own that you knew better than I did what I would have chosen. Yes, he said. I did. I might have agreed with you. I might have stayed in Cornwall by my own will if you had told me. I might have lived apart from you for the rest of my life, knowing why, and built the life I have built, without 9 years of believing I had been thrown away for not being enough. You took that from me, Cassian. You took my chance to be the woman who chose. Yes. You did not save my life. You saved my body, and you killed something else. He did not answer. He could not. He had no answer to give that was not the one she had already named. She rose. He did not. I will not sleep in the South Suite tonight, she said. I will sleep there because Mrs. Pell has prepared it, and because the boy must see that his mother sleeps in the main house and not in some hidden room. But I will not sleep there as your wife, Cassian. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The woman who would have forgiven you that night in Cornwall, if you had told her, died on the road. The woman in this room is a stranger to you, and she has not yet decided what she will do. I know. You will not press me. I will not. You will not speak to the boy between now and the morning of anything we have said in this room. He has had enough today. I will not. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch. Cassian. Yes. There was a fourth condition I did not name this morning. I am naming it now. Name it. You will tell me at breakfast tomorrow why a forged letter from your dead grandmother brought me here on the day a woman called Lady Varick is, according to the Northumberland papers, expected at Ravenshollow on Saturday for a house party your son hasn't been told about. She heard the small intake of his breath behind her. It was the first time in the evening she had surprised him. How did you know? I read newspapers, Cassian. I have read newspapers for 9 years. Did you imagine I would arrive in Northumberland without knowing what was waiting for me here? Good night, Your Grace. She went out and closed the door and walked the long way up to the South Suite with the small, warm weight of the ring still closed in her hand. In the library, the Duke of Ravenshollow sat by the fire for a long time and looked at the empty chair across from him and understood, finally, that the wife he had spent 9 years protecting from a truth had returned to him as a woman he was going to have to earn from the beginning. Lady Varick arrived on Saturday at 3 o'clock in a barouche with 4 matched bays, 2 outriders, and a lady's maid, who descended with the careful expression of a woman who had been instructed to observe and report. Lady Varick herself stepped down without assistance. She was 32, fair-haired, slim, and beautiful in the way certain widows learn to be beautiful, deliberately, without apology, with the small, hard core of a woman who had outlived a husband and intended to outlive any obstacle that came after him. Her name was Adelina Varick. She had been widowed 3 years. Her late husband had been a viscount with insufficient land and considerable debts, both of which she had managed with such efficiency that society had decided, by general unspoken agreement, that she was now precisely the kind of woman a wifeless duke might be expected to consider. She did not know, when her carriage drew up at the steps of Ravenshollow, that the duke had a wife. She found out within 4 minutes of entering the house. Marigold met her in the great hall. She had dressed for it. The gown was pale ivory, cut by a modiste in Bath, who understood that the most expensive women in England wore the simplest cloth, and Marigold wore it with the brooch at her throat and her grandmother's pearls at her ears, the only jewels she had brought from Lyme Regis. She did not stand at the foot of the staircase, which would have been a challenge. She stood, instead, beside the Duke at the center of the hall, with her hand resting lightly on his arm, in the position of a hostess receiving a guest she had personally invited. The Duke had not asked her to do this. She had appeared at the top of the stairs 10 minutes before the carriage was due, descended without speaking, and taken his arm in the hall. He had looked at her once, sidelong, and had not removed her hand. Lady Varick crossed the hall with the smile of a woman accustomed to being expected. "My dear Duke," she said, "forgive the lateness of the hour. The roads from Hexham were quite impossible." She stopped. Her eyes had moved to Marigold. They moved back to the Duke. They moved to Marigold's hand on his arm. Her smile did not falter, because Lady Varick was not the kind of woman whose smile faltered, but something behind it adjusted with the small, precise movement of a clock being reset. "Lady Varick," said the Duke, "may I present my wife, the Duchess of Ravenshollow?" The 4-second silence that followed was, Marigold thought, the most expensive silence she had ever stood in. "Your Grace," Lady Varick said, and curtsied with perfect depth and perfect timing. "I am delighted. I had not realized Her Grace was in residence." "Her Grace returned this week," said the Duke evenly. "Permanently. How wonderful." "Indeed." The pleasantries that followed were the pleasantries any woman of breeding can produce in the seconds between a private catastrophe and the necessity of walking into a drawing room. Marigold said the journey from Hexham must have been tiring. Lady Varick said the country was so refreshing after London. The Duke said tea would be served in the small drawing room. They moved, all 3 of them, with the smooth, coordinated movement of people who had been raised to behave well in front of servants. In the small drawing room, with the door closed and the tea poured and the footman withdrawn, Lady Varick set down her cup, looked at Marigold across the small table, and dropped, by perhaps half a degree, the temperature of her smile. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I had been told you were abroad." "I was, for a number of years. Cornwall, I understood. Then Lyme Regis, for the last 7. Lyme Regis. A small house, a quiet life. I wrote a little. I read a great deal. I made friends one would not expect a duchess to make. It was not unhappy, Lady Varick, only different. You wrote. A little. Under another name. How fascinating. Anything one might have read." Marigold smiled. She had expected the question, in some form, from the moment she had read Lady Varick's name in the Northumberland papers. "That depends, Lady Varick, on what one reads." The Duke was watching her. She could feel him watching her. She had not told him yet what her name was on the books. She had been waiting, for reasons she had not fully examined, to see whether he would learn it from her or from someone else. Lady Varick set down her cup with care. "My late husband," she said, "had a great fondness for the novels of a Mrs. C. Tarleton. 3 of them, I believe. Quietly published. No one knows the author. I read the 3rd only last winter. It made me weep, Your Grace, which I do not often do for a book." Marigold inclined her head. She did not confirm. She did not deny. The Duke set down his own cup, very slowly, and looked at his wife with an expression Marigold could not entirely read. "Mrs. Tarleton, said Lady Varick, watching them both, writes about marriages, I believe, about women who have been wronged by them. I had assumed she was a clergyman's widow. The voice is so unsparing. One imagines a great deal, Marigold said pleasantly, about authors one has not met. Indeed. More tea, Lady Varick? Thank you. No. Lady Varick rose. The visit, by the unwritten rules of these things, wasn't over, but a corner had been turned in it that could not be turned back. She begged a moment to refresh herself before dinner, and Mrs. Pell was summoned, and Lady Varick was led upstairs to her chamber, and the small drawing-room was, abruptly, empty of everyone except the Duke and the Duchess of Ravenshollow. Cassian Whitcomb rose. He walked to the window. He stood there for some time without speaking. Mrs. C. Tarleton, he said finally. Yes. 3 novels. 3 novels and a small book of essays. I have read them. She looked up sharply. He turned from the window. All 3, he said. I did not know who had written them until the 3rd 2 years ago, when a phrase appeared in it that you had once said to me in a corridor of this house, a phrase I had never repeated to another living person. I closed the book and sat in this room for an hour, and I understood, finally, where you had gone, and what you had done with the years I had taken from you. She did not move. You knew, she said, for 2 years. Yes? You did not write. No. Why? Because the books were yours, Marigold. You had built something out of the ruin I had made of you, and it was not mine to put my hand on. If you had wanted me in it, you would have written. You did not write. So I let you have what you had built, because it was the only thing I had not already taken from you. She rose. She crossed the small drawing room. She stopped a foot from him at the window, and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and the afternoon light through the glass behind him put his face half in shadow. Cassian, she said. Yes. She did not finish. She put her hand, instead, against the front of his coat, flat, palm open, the way she had used to do in the first weeks of their marriage. She left it there. He did not move. After a moment, very slowly, his hand came up and covered hers, and held it there, against his chest, and neither of them spoke. The door opened. Thaddeus Whitcomb stood in the doorway with a book under his arm and a question on his mouth that died, again, the moment he saw them. He did not look surprised this time. He looked, Marigold thought, almost satisfied, in the small, grave way 9-year-old boys have of being satisfied when a thing they have privately suspected turns out to be true. Forgive me, he said gravely. I will come back. He withdrew and shut the door, and his small footsteps went away down the corridor. Marigold did not take her hand from her husband's chest for a long time. The witness wasn't the boy. The boy had withdrawn. The boy had shut the door. The boy was, in his 9-year-old way, a co-conspirator now, and not a danger. The witness was Lady Varick's maid. She had been on the small staircase at the end of the corridor, having been sent down by her mistress to fetch a forgotten traveling case from the carriage. She had passed the small drawing room. The door, opened by the boy, had stood ajar for the 7 seconds it took him to enter and withdraw. In those 7 seconds, the maid had seen her grace the Duchess of Ravenshollow, standing very close to her husband at the window, with her hand on his coat and his hand over hers. And the maid had seen, also, the look on the Duchess's face, which was not the look of a woman who had been told her marriage was a formality. The maid was a professional. She did not stop. She did not glance twice. She continued down the staircase, fetched the case, carried it up the back stairs to her mistress's chamber, and, while unpacking it, mentioned the matter in the level practiced voice of a woman who had been with Lady Varick for 6 years, and knew exactly what her mistress wished to be told. Lady Varick, before her mirror, didn't turn her head. Are you certain? Yes, my lady. How close? A foot, perhaps less. Her hand on his chest, his hand on hers. The boy saw them as well. The boy. Master Thaddeus, my lady. He had come to the door. He saw them and withdrew. He did not appear distressed. Lady Varick looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She was a beautiful woman. She knew it without vanity, the way a swordsman knows his sword. She had come to Ravenshollow expecting a long, quiet courtship of a wifeless duke, and had found instead a wife who wasn't only in residence, but was, evidently, in the process of being reconciled to. She considered her position with the same swift, unsentimental clarity with which she had once considered her late husband's debts. Thank you, Pierce. That will be all. My lady. When the maid had gone, Lady Varick sat down at the writing desk. She drew out a sheet of paper. She did not write at once. She sat with the pen in her hand, and she thought. And at length she began. The letter she wrote was 3 sentences long. It was addressed to her cousin in London, who was the wife of a baronet with extensive social connections and a known appetite for the placement of certain pieces of information in the right ears. The letter said that the Duchess of Ravenshollow had returned, after a long absence, to her husband's house. It said that the Duchess had spent the last 7 years in Lyme Regis, under another name, and that Lady Varick had reason to believe she was the author of 3 novels recently published in Edinburgh, under the name Mrs. C. Tarleton. Novels which, in their unflinching depiction of the inner life of an abandoned wife, were now revealed to be drawn from the Duchess's own marriage. It said that Lady Varick thought her cousin would find the matter of public interest. She sealed the letter. She rang for the maid. She gave instructions for it to be sent by the morning post. Below in the house, Marigold was being told by Mrs. Pell that her Grace's son had asked, very politely, whether his mother might come up to the schoolroom before dinner to look at his Latin exercise, which he was uncertain about. She went. She sat with him for an hour. She did not weep. He did not ask her difficult questions. He asked her instead how to render patientia in a sentence, and she told him, and he wrote it down. And at the end of the hour he looked up at her with his gray eyes, and said, very seriously, Marigold, if you do not mind, I think I should like to call you mother soon. Not yet, but soon. I am only telling you because Miss Sedgwick says one ought to give people warning when one intends to change the way one addresses them. Marigold said that he might give her any warning he liked, and that she would be ready whenever he was, and that if he wanted her to be mother in a week, or in a year, or in 5 years, she would be mother on the day he asked, and not before. He nodded gravely. He returned to his Latin. She did not yet know about the letter Lady Varick had written. She did not yet know that by the morning post, 3 sentences would be traveling south to London in a leather pouch, and that within a week, those 3 sentences would be in a drawing room in Mayfair, and within 2 weeks, they would be in a half-dozen drawing rooms, and within a month, they would be a small column in a scandal sheet, and that Mrs. C. Tarleton, who had built her quiet, independent life on the assumption that no one in the world of titles would ever know who she was about to discover that the world of titles had found her. She found out 4 days later. She found out at breakfast. She found out because a letter arrived for her at Ravenshollow, addressed in the careful hand of her publisher in Edinburgh, marked urgent, and inside the letter was a clipping from a London paper, and the clipping said, in the small, malicious prose of these things, that a certain ducal house in Northumberland is presently sheltering a certain returned wife, who has, in her absent years, made her living by the publication of novels in which her own husband and her own marriage have, by the author's apparent admission, served as material. Readers who have wondered at the unusual sympathy of Mrs. C. Tarleton's portraiture may now wonder no longer. She read it twice. She set it down on the breakfast table beside her cup, and she looked across the table at her husband, who had not yet seen it, and she said in a voice that was quite level, Cassian, we have a problem." He read it. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was the voice of the man Marigold had married, not the man who had sent her away. It was the voice he had used in the early months, in candle-lit corridors, when he had told her he had never wanted to keep anything in his life until he had wanted to keep her. Marigold, yes. Did you write about us? She had been waiting for the question for 9 years. She had imagined it in a dozen rooms. She did not lie now. Yes, she said. I wrote about a marriage that had been broken by one party's silence. I wrote about a woman who had been sent away and did not know why. I wrote about her years alone. I wrote about what she became. I did not name us. I did not describe this house. I changed every detail a reader could trace. But the bones of it, Cassian, were ours. I was not lying to my readers. I was telling the truth I had been given. I'm glad you did. She looked at him. I'm glad you did, he repeated. I'm glad someone wrote it. I'm glad it was you. If it had been any other living person, I would have crossed England to stop them. Because it was you, I read all 3 books, and I closed each of them, and I thought, she has done something with the wound I gave her that I could not have done myself. She has made it useful. I am not sorry the books exist, Marigold. I am only sorry the cost of them, now, is going to fall on you. It is going to fall on us. Yes. On the boy. Yes. She rose. She walked to the window. The lake outside was bright that morning, a pale silver under a thin sun. She thought, with the small detachment of a woman who had learned over 9 years to think clearly under blows, of what would now be required. Cassian, the house party. It cannot proceed. It must proceed. He looked up sharply. Marigold, be reasonable. Listen to me. If we cancel the house party, every guest who is coming will arrive at their next destination with the story half told, and the story will tell itself in our absence, and we will have no part in the telling. If we host the house party, I will be in this house, at the head of your table, in front of every person who matters in this county, as your wife, and the story will be told in our presence and on our terms. Lady Varick will not be invited to remain. The other guests will. We will give them a weekend they will remember for the rest of their lives, Cassian, and we will give it to them as a couple. And by Monday morning, the column in the London paper will have a great deal of competition from 20 different first-hand accounts of how the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow received their guests. He looked at her. You are not the woman I sent away. No, Cassian. I am not. You are formidable. I had 9 years to become so. He rose. He crossed to her at the window. He did not touch her. He stood beside her, looking at the lake, and after a moment he said, quietly, Marigold, I want to ask you something. I have not earned the right to ask it. I am asking it anyway. Ask. When this is over, when the weekend has been survived, and the column has been buried under 20 better stories, will you stay? She did not answer at once. She thought of the small house in Lyme Regis. She thought of her writing desk and the window that looked over the harbor. She thought of the friends she had made there, the bookseller, the curate's widow, the retired naval surgeon who came on Thursdays to argue about novels. She thought of the life she had built with her own hands out of the ruin he had made. She thought also of the boy upstairs who had said he would like to call her mother soon. Not yet, but soon. I do not know yet, Cassian. I understand. But I know that I will not leave this house before I know. Whatever else happens, I will not be sent away again, and I will not flee. The decision, when I make it, will be mine. Do you understand? Yes. And Cassian? Yes. If I decide to stay, it will not be as the woman I was. It will be as the woman I am. The books will continue. The name will continue. Mrs. C. Tarleton does not retire because her readers have learned who she is. She writes the next book. Do you understand that as well?" He looked at her. Something in his face moved. "I understand," he said, "that I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve a woman who built herself out of what I took from her, and that whether or not she chooses to remain in this house, I will be grateful until the day I die. That she came back to it long enough for me to know who she had become." She did not answer. She put her hand, instead, against the front of his coat, the way she had done 3 days ago in the drawing room. He did not cover it with his this time. He bent his head and pressed his forehead, very briefly, against hers. And they stood that way at the window of the breakfast room while the sun came up properly over the lake. And the small gray thing in her chest that she had carried for 9 years began, by some slow, unfamiliar process, to open. The breakfast room door opened. Thaddeus Whitcomb stood in the doorway in his small riding clothes, his hat under his arm, and he looked at his parents, and his parents looked at him, and the boy said in his small, grave voice, "I am going down to the lake with Mr. Halford to see the new pony. I thought I should tell you both, together, because I think one ought to tell one's parents these things together when one has the chance." He waited. "Yes," Marigold said. "Thank you, Thaddeus. We will see you at luncheon." "Yes, Mother." He had said it. He had not warned her. He had said he would warn her. He had decided, evidently, that the morning he found his mother and his father standing together at the window of the breakfast room with their foreheads touching was a morning that did not require a warning. He bowed, gravely, and went. The door closed behind him. Marigold did not weep. She had not wept in 9 years, and she did not begin now. But she pressed her face, briefly, into the front of her husband's coat, and Cassian Whitcomb put his arms around her properly, for the first time in 9 years and 3 months, and held her there, while the small, unfamiliar opening in her chest became finally something she could name. The house party was a triumph, in the small, precise way these things are measured. 18 guests arrived on the Friday. Lady Varick was not among them. A note had been sent to her London address regretting that, owing to a domestic alteration, the invitation must be withdrawn. The note was civil. It said nothing else. Lady Varick understood it perfectly, and never spoke of Ravenshollow again in any drawing room in England, which was, Marigold thought afterwards, the greatest compliment the woman had ever paid her. The 18 who came were received by the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow at the head of the receiving line in the Great Hall. Marigold wore the ivory gown from Bath, with the brooch and the pearls, and her hair coiled simply, and she received the Marchioness of Ettingham and the Earl of Stanardine, and the rest of the county in the unhurried voice of a woman who had not been away for 9 years, but had merely been, for a season, occupied elsewhere. The Marchioness, who had known Marigold's mother before the marriage, kissed her on both cheeks and said audibly, "My dear child, we have missed you," and the rest of the line took their cue from the Marchioness, and the cue carried through the weekend. The boy was present at the long dinner on the Saturday. He sat at his mother's left, which Marigold had insisted on, and he conducted himself, the Marchioness said afterwards, like a small ambassador. When asked, by an elderly bishop, where his mother had been all these years, Thaddeus replied, with the unblinking clarity of a child who had decided his answer in advance, that his mother had been in Lyme Regis writing books, and that she had come home because he had asked her to, and that he hoped she would stay because he was only 9, and there were a great many things he had not yet had the chance to ask her. The bishop did not ask another question. The column in the London paper, against which the weekend had been organized, was buried, as Marigold had predicted, under 18 first-hand accounts of a country house party at which the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow had been seen by every person of consequence in the county to be perfectly, evidently, and undeniably reconciled. By the second week, the column had been forgotten. By the fourth, it had been replaced by the small, dignified announcement in the same paper that Her Grace the Duchess of Ravenshollow had returned to her husband's seat, and that the family was in residence. On the Sunday morning of the house party, before the guests rose, Marigold walked down to the lake alone. She stopped at the small stone bench beneath the willow. She had sat on this bench as a bride 9.5 years ago. She sat on it now. The lake was very still. A heron stood in the reeds at the far bank, considering its breakfast. She heard a step on the gravel and did not turn. "I thought I might find you here," said her husband. "I thought you might." He sat beside her on the bench, not touching. Close enough. "Marigold." "Yes." "My grandmother left something for you. I have not given it to you yet, because I didn't know whether you would stay long enough to receive it. She left it in a sealed packet in her writing desk, addressed to you, with instructions that it was to be put into your hand only if you returned to this house of your own will." He drew the packet from his coat. It was small, plain, sealed with the same dowager's seal that her son had forged 11 days earlier. She knew, Marigold said quietly. She knew what? She knew the boy would write to me. She knew he would find a way. She left him the seal because she wanted him to. "Yes," he said. "I think she did." He put the packet into Marigold's hands. She broke the seal. The dowager's hand was inside, the real hand this time, the looped firm script of a woman who had written letters at this same desk for 60 years. The letter was not long. "My dear Marigold, if this is in your hand, you have come back, which means I was right about the boy and right about my grandson. And I am writing this in the cheerful expectation of being right about a great many things from beyond the grave, which is one of the few advantages of dying. My grandson sent you away because he is his father's son, and his father was a fool of the same particular kind. The Whitcomb men have, for 4 generations, mistaken the prevention of suffering for the practice of love. They are wrong. The practice of love is the sharing of suffering, my dear, not the sparing of it. He took your share of the suffering away from you and called it a kindness. It was not a kindness. It was a theft. I know what the physicians said. I knew it within the week. I told my grandson, on the morning he sent you away, that he was making the worst mistake of his life, and he told me he was making it anyway. I forgave him for it because he is my grandson, and because I had loved his father, who had made the same mistake, and because I am old enough to know that men who love badly do not love less. But I did not forgive him on your behalf. That was never mine to do. Forgive him if you wish, my dear, or do not. Either is yours. But if you read this letter, you have come back, and I will tell you what I told myself the morning my own husband sent me away from this house for one summer 53 years ago, for reasons that seemed to him sufficient at the time. I told myself, I am not the wife he sent away. I am the woman who came back. Let him meet her now, and let him love her if he can. He could. He did. We had 38 more years. Be the woman who came back, Marigold. He will spend the rest of his life learning her. Make him work for it. Your grandmother in love and stubbornness, Cordelia Whitcomb. Marigold lowered the letter. She did not weep. She had not wept in 9 years, and she did not begin now. But she folded the paper twice, and she put it inside the front of her gown, against her skin, where she had carried the brooch for 9 years, and she sat on the stone bench beneath the willow and looked at her husband. Cassian. Yes. I'm going to stay. He closed his eyes. But not as the woman you sent away. No. As the woman who came back. Yes. Then you have a great deal of work to do, Your Grace. I know. Begin. He opened his eyes. He turned on the bench, and he took her left hand in his. and he took the small gold ring out of the inside pocket of his coat, where he had carried it for 9 years and 3 months, and he slid it back onto her finger. She let him. The heron at the far bank rose and flew across the lake in a slow, grave arc, and circled once over the water, and settled again among the reeds. The announcement appeared in the Northumberland Gazette the following spring. It said only that Her Grace the Duchess of Ravenshollow had been delivered, in the early hours of the 17th of April, of a daughter, and that mother and child were doing well, and that the daughter had been named Cordelia Honora Whitcomb, after her great-grandmother and her godmother. The announcement did not say what the physicians had said. 3 physicians had come in the months before. The first, Dr. Maitland, who had attended the first birth, had been retired by then, and had traveled from Berwick at the Duke's request. The second was a London man of considerable reputation. The third was a woman, an Edinburgh physician of the new kind, recommended to Marigold by a friend in her writing circle. The 3 of them had examined Marigold, had consulted, had argued, had agreed. The agreement had been this, that 9 years had passed, that the body was not the body of a girl of 21, that with sufficient rest, sufficient care, and the attendance of a skilled midwife, a second confinement was not what it had been the first time. It was not without risk. Nothing was without risk. But it was not, as it had been the first time, almost certain death. The decision, all 3 physicians had said, was hers. Cassian had not pressed her. He had not, in the 8 months between the morning at the lake and the morning she had told him she was carrying their second child, raised the matter once. He had only said, when she told him, that whatever she had decided, and he would not take that from her again as long as he lived. The labor had been long, but not terrible. The midwife from Edinburgh had been excellent. The child had come at 4 in the morning, small and loud, and entirely furious at the indignity of having been born, and the midwife had laid her on Marigold's chest, and Marigold had looked down at the small red face with its small, angry mouth, and had laughed for the first time in her life, the way a woman laughs who has done a thing she had been told 9 years ago she would die doing. Cassian had been in the room. She had insisted on it. He had not been in the room for the first birth, because he had been pacing in his study on the floor below, and Marigold had decided, the night she had told him she was with child, that whatever happened this time, it would not happen with him on a different floor. He had stood by the bed, white as the sheet, holding her hand, and when the child came, he had said only, very quietly, Marigold. And then he had not been able to say anything else for some time. Thaddeus came in 20 minutes later. He had been waiting, fully dressed, in the corridor since midnight. He bowed, gravely, to the midwife and to the wet nurse, and he came to the bedside and looked at his sister with the long, considering expression of a 9-year-old assessing a stranger who would shortly be his responsibility. She is very small, he said. She is. Is she well? She is well. And you, mother? Marigold smiled. She had been mother, by the boy's decision, since the morning of the house party, when he had announced at breakfast in front of 3 guests that he had decided not to wait any longer, and that anyone who had a difficulty with the matter might take it up with him personally. I am well, Thaddeus. He nodded, satisfied. He bent, with the unself-conscious dignity of a child who had been raised by a careful father, and he kissed his mother on the forehead, and then his sister on the small dark head, and he withdrew. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow were left in the room with their daughter and the lifting gray light of a Northumberland morning. Cassian. Yes. There is something I want to tell you. Tell me. I have written a 4th book. I finished it 3 weeks ago. I sent the manuscript to Edinburgh on Tuesday. What is it about? It is about a marriage that was broken and was mended. It is not a sad book, Cassian. It is the first book I have written that is not a sad book. I do not know whether my readers will forgive me for it." He looked at her across the small, dark head of their daughter. He smiled. It was the rare, unguarded smile of his early married months, the one she had not seen in 9 years, and now saw again, and would, she thought, see now for as long as either of them lived. "They will forgive you," he said, "or they will not. Either is theirs. But the book is yours, Marigold, and so am I, and so is the boy in the corridor and the girl in your arms. And I do not think, my love, that we are going to be very much concerned this year with what is forgiven by anyone who is not in this room." She closed her eyes. She had not wept in over 10 years. She wept now, quietly, with her face against the small, dark head of her daughter, and her husband held her hand, and outside the window, the light came up properly over the lake, and the heron, who had been there 9 months and was a fixture now, rose from the reeds and flew its slow, grave arc across the water, and did not look back. Years later, when the children were grown, when Thaddeus was at Oxford, and Cordelia had already announced, at 16, that she intended to become a physician of the new Edinburgh kind. Whether her father approved or not, Marigold would sit at the small writing desk by the window of the south suite, where the inkstand had been polished now for so many years that the silver had lost all memory of having ever been dull, and she would write the dedication of her 7th book. The dedication would read, "For C, who carried it for 9 years, and for the boy who sent for me, and for the woman who told me to come back." The reviewers would speculate, in the small, careful prose of these things, about who C might be, and about who the boy might be, and about whose voice it was the author had been told to come back in. They would not arrive at the truth. The truth was for the 4 people in the house, and for the heron at the lake, and for an old woman in a country churchyard who had written 1 letter from beyond the grave and had been right, as she had said she would be, about a great many things. It was enough. It was, in fact, everything. Thank you for being here. You are why these stories find their listeners, because you believe in love that learns to ask before it decides, in second chances that are not given but earned, in women who build themselves out of what was taken from them, and in men who learn at last that the practice of love is the sharing of suffering and not the sparing of it. Your presence makes this small candlelit space warm, and I am grateful for every quiet evening you spend among these characters. If a particular line stayed with you tonight, or a moment moved you more than you expected, I would love to hear which. Your words guide the next story and the one after that. If you would like more Regency romances about marriages that were broken and mended, about wives who came back, and about the long, careful work of love that begins after the wedding rather than ending at it, do consider subscribing. Thank you for being here. You make this small, bright place what it is.